You know, there's all kinds of different responses. Everything from people who have not even heard about the Common Core or what it is, to people who say, oh, yeah, we did that last year. We're done. We got it. Of those two kind of distinct areas, ends of the spectrum, the people who say they've already got it worry me more than the people who are saying they've never heard of this. Those are the people who typically don't quite understand the scope of this work. And I'll admit a sense of guilt that when we were going through the whole adoption process, the typical language surrounding consideration of the adoption of the Common Core was, hey, listen, it's not that much different than what we're doing now. It's based on the best work we've been doing for a while. And now we are here in implementation and we're telling you, actually, this is hard. Actually, this is a significant shift from current typical practice. And so that was, you know, a bit of a refinement of the message, but certainly we need to get down to the nitty-gritty and actually making this work happen. And so it is true that in this country, we have operated in a standards environment for about 20 years now or so. And this is different than that. So what the typical response of those who say we're already there is what one of my colleagues in Tennessee refers to as the great binder replacement. We took the Illinois state standards off the shelf. We put these standards on the shelf. Instead of numbers before letters, we have letters before numbers, and it's just a new tagging system. In fact, a bit of work that I did over the last year was working with Race to the Top states with the U.S. Department of Education, talking to them about the standards. And interestingly, one of the things that the U.S. Department of Education did is they used to survey these states fairly frequently about what their needs were in implementation of all the reforms. And they actually told me that they rated instructional leadership as the lowest priority, the least urgent and the least impactful thing that had to happen in order to implement the reforms. And when they were sharing this information with me, I, started questioning everything I believed about education. I said, are you kidding me? How could they possibly have said that? What could have possibly caused them to think that instructional leadership was so unimportant in this work? And then they asked me to do a presentation about the standards themselves, and I did my little show, which you're about to experience. And the next month, they gave another survey, same kind of questions, and instructional leadership became #1 thing. And that really spoke to this idea that this is more than just a desk audit that we're talking about. This isn't just a gap analysis of a curriculum. Fourth grade fractions were here, and now they're here, and we're just kind of shuffling the cards around. This is a change in approach to standards instruction. And so while we've had standards for a couple of decades now, what we typically have not had in many of our school systems is standards-based instruction. So if I were to describe kind of my idea of the difference between those two things, in a world where we just have standards alignment, a teacher looks at their curriculum, maybe, and thinks about what he or she wants to teach, plans out the lesson, the student learning objectives and all of that, and then kind of as a last thing looks through the standards and says, which one can I hook this to? And it's kind of like the last thing that you do. Very different from standards-based instruction, where the concept is that we know what the standards are. These represent expectations that we hold for all of our students in that particular grade. And my job as a teacher is to figure out how many ways I need to present this material to my students. My students need to experience these understandings so that by the end of the year, all of my kids reach these standards. And so it is true that these are minimum expectations. I mean, it's kind of interesting to say that when we talk about raising expectations. This is the new minimum. It is not intended to be a maximum, but it is in fact intended to drive instruction rather than just a secondary thought of what we're aligning to. And why we can start having this conversation now, and perhaps why it didn't happen in the previous era of standards beforehand, had a lot to do with those standards themselves. And so most of us are aware that typical state standards that preceded the Common Core were excessively long. So someone once did an analysis of the California state standards and said, if a teacher decided to teach all the standards in California, it would take 33 years. I imagine, my own state of New Jersey, probably similar. I'm sure similar in Illinois as well. So by design, you can't start off your school year saying, okay, what's on my plate? What is my agenda to teach this year? You right away have to make some choices. Within that long list of standards, another problem that we had is that many of the standards were very vague. So my favorite example that I often use is in New Jersey, we had a 3rd grade standard that said, students will explore concepts of fractions. Like, okay, we'll have a pizza party today. Great, done, standards aligned lesson. And they don't really give you the information about, so what would that look like on an assessment item? What would that look like in performance? And so when you think about vague statements, they don't really help drive instruction either. Assessments tend to be not good drivers either, because they are typically sampling. We don't want to, make the tests last weeks and weeks long. So we have, 117 math goals this year. There certainly aren't 117 questions on our state assessments. How can we make decisions about which things get kind of real estate on our assessments? We've typically done, whether you call it roulette or whatever, just kind of random decisions, maybe a bit better than that, but not much, in what gets on our assessments. So the result of all of this is that when we look at standards instructions before Common Core, it has typically been a teacher-focused conversation. What did the teacher present? What was the pacing chart? Where was the lesson plans that showed that you actually paid attention to this? Very different from a truly standards-based instructional program where your question, front and center, is, did the students learn? And when we have kind of this huge breakneck pace of instruction, we can't even have that question of, did the students learn? The idea is, how much did you cover? What did you get through? And so this is really where all of these changes are coming from, this idea of going from standards-aligned instruction to standards-based instruction with a set of standards that we present before you. So one thing that I'll just kind of put out there, and I think it's very important, is that this isn't just like an idea that we just all as educators kind of woke up with, saying, you know what we should do? We should prepare our kids. Like, that's a good idea. Why didn't somebody tell me that before? So this comes after a lot of hard work, a lot of good intention, and so it is typical that when I speak to groups of educators that they are very eager to tell me everything they've been doing. We have extended learning days and tutoring programs and mentoring programs, and here's our PD program, and teachers come in for the summer to do this, and all I'm asking them is, of all of that you're doing, what's working? And that tends to be a pretty disarming question in education circles because we don't take the time to look at the results of our work. So we have implemented standards for over 20 years in this country, but they themselves, the existence of those standards did not do much to make impact on student achievement. When we look at all of that hard work, we continue to have significant gaps in achievement, as well as significant gaps in expectations. So for example, in my state of New Jersey, when we start off with a set of standards that are way too long, I know from talking to students, talking to parents, looking at what's going on in the schools, that there are some schools in New Jersey that work on this set of standards. There are other schools in New Jersey that have their kids working at this set of standards. They're both working on the standards, but we continue, even though the whole purpose of standards was to say, what we continue to say now, shouldn't matter what your zip code is, when you have a list of standards too long, we continue to have those kinds of gaps. Despite doubling or even tripling the investment in education over the past 40 years, despite a significant decrease in class size over 40 years, a significant infusion of research-based practice over 40 years, we have another indicator of data, which is our National Assessment of Education Progress. And over 40 years, even though lots and lots of people can tell me how hard they've been working and all of the things that have been going on, when we look at this data over 40 years, in 4th grade literacy, we see a slight uptick in performance over 40 years, we do. In 8th grade, 40 years, results are as flat as can be. And in the limited administration that we give on the NAEP assessment in high school, over 40 years, we are actually seeing a decline in performance. So we can all feel good about how hard we're all working, but this is the real deal. this is the data that is showing us, what's actually happening. We can take a look at the most recent ACT data, which is supposed to be what kids are, preparing for. College and career readiness, that's what we're doing. And of the students just last year nationally that took the ACT, and I know you have some Illinois-specific data, 28% of test takers did not meet the college readiness benchmark in anything. And so I'm always reminded, looking at this from a national perspective, this doesn't count our dropouts. This typically counts kids who are at least intending to go to college or thinking that might be a possibility. It's pretty sobering. And as we all kind of rally the troops around every kid going to college, we have sobering data about remediation rates. So how many of our students graduate, earn a diploma, get credits, pass their courses, enter a college, only to find out that they do not have the knowledge and skills that will even earn them into a credit-bearing course. And so it's one thing to send a kid to college, but quite a different thing to prepare them to be successful in college. And so that's really kind of the rallying cry that kind of reminds us that it's not enough just to work hard. We really need to figure out what it is that we should be working at. So what makes these standards